So there we were, me and my uncle just walking down the street talking about some random BS when an idea came to me that for my next film, I was gonna make a fan film on quite possibly the scariest movie of all time, Sinister. So, of course the first thing we had to think of was what we were gonna do to recreate the iconic death scenes from the Sinister films. Some of our earliest ideas were burning someone's face with an iron and backing over someone with a car. But since there was already snow on the ground and winter was coming up, we thought it should be snow related, which works out well because the Christmas morning tape happens to be my second favorite of the series. And then my uncle came up with the brilliant idea to run someone over with a snowblower, which was perfect because now it was going to be a mix of my two favorite tapes. And that idea alone was so good that I just had to give my uncle a writing credit on the film. And I just want to take the time to appreciate just how much my uncle does for my movies. Whether it's laying in the snow for hours, or helping me with my cringy Instagram video, he's always there ready to help no matter what. Also playing roles in like every movie I've made, and being the cameraman for like 90% of this movie. Like anytime you see the camera moving in this film, and I'm in front of it, it's 90% him. He never even complains, regardless of how many takes I make him do. So here's to the dishes, man.
Didn't know this is more dishes!
So fast forwarding a bit, production started on December 18th, and the very last shot I filmed was done on April 11th. And conveniently, the very first shot of the movie is actually one of the first shots I filmed. The reason why I started with this was to recreate the openings of both Sinister films, since they both start with important tapes that we come back to later in the films. They also both start with the Super 8 filter, with that little orange rectangle on the left. Now, one of the most important parts of the movie was getting the look of the Super 8 film just right. The first thing I tried to do was find a Super 8 camera. And I did end up finding one in an antique shop, but it was too expensive, and I also realized I have no idea how to use a Super 8 camera anyway. I really wanted it to look authentic and shoot it on 8mm like the first film, but unfortunately I had to go the Sinister 2 route and just film it normally and put a filter over it in post. But to be honest, I don't think I did that bad of a job. And to achieve this look, I had to do more than simply just lowering the quality. The first thing I did was mess around with the filters. I wanted to make sure it had a yellowish tint to it, to replicate the look of the old-fashioned incandescent light bulb on the Super 8 camera. And then the finishing touch was just adding the grain. Now before I settled on just using my phone to shoot the tape, I did test out a variety of digital cameras first. But unfortunately the oldest one was broken, the newest one's quality was too good, and although the quality on the second oldest one does look terrible, I think it looks a little too terrible. And for the lighting, I also tested out a variety of flashlights, because the flash on my phone was way too bright. And the blue flashlight was also too bright, same with the skinny one, and even though the green one had a yellow light like on the Super 8 camera, I just didn't like how little you could see with it. So the flashlight that worked just right was the little baby one that I also used in my other film, Cassette. And this is how I had to hold it since I needed my other arm for things like opening the door. And just how did I attach all of this to the snowblower, you might ask? Well, at first we tried tape, but that didn't work out very well. So then we tried these little plastic clamps. But we managed to break every single one we had, so we had to go with whatever this is instead. And it didn't look that stable, but it was all we had at that point. Now before I take out the snowblower, I glance over at our lawnmower, which is clearly a reference to the lawnmower scene in Sinister, since my tape is heavily inspired by it. Now as the lawnmower transitions into my car, you may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, doesn't every movie this guy makes start with him driving up the hill into his driveway? And isn't that kind of lazy and unoriginal? Well, yes it is. But I promise, whatever my next movie is, I won't start it this way. Okay, so right off the bat I wanted to admit that I was a little intimidated to be making this film, considering that all of my previous films have been found footage up till this point. Now I have done little school projects, but I didn't really take them seriously, and they're just straight up awful. Now, all things considered, I think I did a pretty decent job on my first time, and I'd say that this is my best work by far. But that's not to say that any of it was easy, because just this first scene already caused us so many problems. Like, I can't tell you just how many times we had to go up and down this hill over and over and over again. Whether it started to snow, or the camera was too shaky, cars in the background leaving, realizing my uncle's fingers were in the shot the whole time, the clouds in the sky changing too much, or realizing on the second day that you were wearing the wrong jacket the whole time. Now, would the average viewer notice any of this? Probably not, but I would, and I'm a hard man to please. Another thing we had to worry about was the camera falling off the top of my car, since there's actually nothing holding it down. Here's another little Easter egg. I'm listening to the same song that plays at the beginning of my last two movies. I'm also wearing the same outfit that I wore as the killer in Cassette. And no, it's not because I can't afford new clothes. That's only half of the reason. Now, a handy little tool I used throughout the movie was the stabilization tool. And although it worked for a lot of shots, sometimes it would warp the footage and it would just look weird. Here's a deleted shot that I was quite proud of, but unfortunately, it was too easy to tell that it was my grandpa driving instead of me. And I achieved the shot by standing on top of the shed. And it had to be me up there, because my uncle probably would have fallen through the roof. But something my uncle is good for was being the bodyguard for my camera. Like, would you mess with him? I know I wouldn't. Speaking of deleted shots, here's a quick montage of all the shots I deleted. Most of them were cut simply just because they were unnecessary. And this one even has a funny blooper of my sister wiping out on the toboggan. Now, the whole idea to make the house an Airbnb came from Barbarian, because I wondered, would Baguul still come after you if you only stayed one night in the house and didn't actually move in? Also, what if you don't have kids? Then who's he gonna get to do his bidding? Originally, I was gonna have my grandpa be the owner of the Airbnb, but I didn't want any of our acting to bring the film down, so I tried making it like No One Will Save You and tell the story without any dialogue. So instead, the owner of the Airbnb is the legendary Rob W., who was heavily involved with the making of Cassette and Demonetized, who even gets an executive producer credit on this film because he supplied me with the projector, and also paid to get the trailer made, which brought the budget up to $130. And the picture that I used for him is specifically from this video. And speaking of Rob, this shot was actually his idea, and how I accomplished it was putting some metal thing into these conveniently placed holes. Now, for my camera setup, I taped a lens cap on top of a tripod and then placed a GPS holder on top to hold the phone in place. Okay, so one of the many nuisances of filming was that I had to replace the audio in every single scene because there was always some noise in the background. Whether it was the buzzing of the computer, the fireplace, someone watching TV, the air conditioning, footsteps upstairs, or the thing that ruined the most audio, the fridge. But back to the movie, if you look closely here, you can see a cameo from my uncle, since we got his reflection in the door. And then later in the scene, I poke a little fun at myself, since when my character's looking through the rooms, he gives a disgusted look when he checks out this one. And if you've seen my other movies, you know that this is in fact my room. Okay, now we're getting into the good stuff. So since I didn't actually use Super 8, I had to put the home movies onto USBs instead. And there's a story behind pretty much all of them. The first one being target practice. Now, the idea came from my friend Nick, but his idea was to use a gun, so instead I switched it out with a bow and arrow. And a funny little Easter egg, the name Calder actually comes from my high school bully. And if you're watching this, Calder, feck you! Next up is Tubby time. So when I first started making this movie, I had plans to make a part 2 and 3, with my friends Rob and Jonah making their own tapes. And Rob's idea was Tubby time, where he would have boiled his family alive in a hot tub. And Jonah's idea was Fall Season, where he would have tied his family up and thrown them over a cliff. And Family Picnic was my uncle's girlfriend's idea. And let's just say it involved fire ants. And I actually mentioned car trouble earlier. It was one of my earliest ideas, where I would have backed over my family with the car. And for camping, it basically would have been this kill from the Friday the 13th remake. Which finally brings us to Snow Day 24. Initially, I was gonna have my sister do the little kid drawings, but she's just too dang professional, and every version she did was just too good. Oh, and also, this whole scene is obviously a reference to the first Sinister, since I find a box of tapes, and I use the flash on my phone to see better, and then I start recording the weird drawings I find, and then a random noise stops me from seeing the last picture. For these two shots, I had to get creative. Since obviously I can't afford a dolly, I put the camera on a chair, and my grandpa slowly pushed it towards me. And for the lighting, I just put my MacBook on the chair next to me, and hid it from the camera using a blanket. And the movie I'm watching in this scene is Color Out of Space, because I wanted magenta colored lighting. And then for the scene where I set up the projector and stuff, I was going for an Edgar Wright style, using a bunch of quick cuts. Now since we didn't have an actual projector screen, we had to make our own. And a few things we tried were blankets, a blank canvas, and styrofoam for some reason. And eventually, we chose to go with a towel. But forget all that, now we're finally at the scene we've all been waiting for. And let me start off by saying, I put all I could into this scene, because obviously the tapes in the Sinister films are the most important part. So I tried my absolute hardest to capture that eerie feeling of the tapes from the Sinister movies. Starting with the part where the family is all hanging out, and it looks like they're being stalked. And quick little fun fact, this is the same park that I filmed at for Mark of the Coven. And the shot where I look through the window is a reference to this shot in the first film. And an Easter egg that I put in this shot is that they're watching Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension, because it also happens to be a Christmas movie. Yet another thing in this shot is if you look closely, you can see that they're all drinking something, which is how the families always get drugged in the Sinister films. And who would have guessed it, now they're all tied up with duct tape. You think these families would learn their lesson eventually. I was also gonna bury them in snow, like in the Christmas morning tape, but it was already cold enough for them already. And here's yet another reference, and this is how I accomplished it. I had to use the TV because the projector was too dim to show up in the reflection. Now a funny thing about this shot is that it's actually in reverse, and that's because I wasn't strong enough to push the snowblower. Ah! For the money shot of the blood coming out of the snowblower, we used fake blood, ketchup, and strawberry syrup, and then mixed them all together with some snow. But the snow wouldn't come out red, so we tried spray paint next. And we got some results, but it just looked pink. And no matter what we tried, it never showed up red. And we honestly thought we were screwed. Until I realized I could just change the saturation in post. Problem solved. I freaked out for nothing. And speaking of things not going very well, this is actually how I planned to have the camera set up, but there's no amount of stabilization that can fix this. Now if you look closely for this shot, you might notice that Baguul is hiding in the window. And I had to include him because he always loves to make cameos in his own tapes. And the way I did it was actually very simple. I just printed out a picture of Baguul and taped it to the inside of the window. You know, I also had to include the Baguul symbol because not only does Baguul like to photobomb, he also likes to leave his mark everywhere. And since I used paint, I couldn't get it off the shed, so it's actually still there to this day. But since my grandma's lame and doesn't want a fictional demon symbol on the shed, we had to flip the wood around. And this shot right here is one of the many stabilized shots, and that's why it looks weird here, and why the paper kind of just jumps into place. So now we're finally at the end, and it's time to talk about the very last shot. It was done using a suitcase this time around, because I wanted something lower to the ground than the chair. And we auditioned a few suitcases until we found the one that rolled the smoothest. And a creepy blooper from this shot is that when I put the box down, a music box started playing. And that's because I filmed this before I had the projector, so the box was actually just filled with random junk. Now, since both Sinister movies end with a jump scare, you know I had to do it too. But since I didn't want to buy a baguul mask, considering they were either too expensive or too ugly, I resorted to going on Instagram, searching up the hashtag baguul cosplay, and messaging everyone until one of them agreed to help. So huge thanks to the guy that helped me out, because now all I needed to do was just fade between the two shots. Oh, and obviously, this whole shot is a reference to the ending of the first Sinister film. And finally, the credits are also a reference to the end of Sinister, since it's black and white, and also has the Super 8 filter. And that's it. That's the whole... I feel like I'm forgetting to talk about something. I feel like I'm forgetting to talk about the most important part of any Sinister film. Oh, that's right, the soundtrack! So right off the bat, I wanted to say that I knew just how important my song choice for the whole murder scene would be. And my very first choice was the same song that they used in the Christmas morning tape. Since it's already Christmas themed, but I didn't go with it because I wanted it to be more original. So my journey to find the perfect song begins. First off, I went through the music of the people involved with the Sinister soundtracks, such as Ulver, Judge Hydrogen, Aghast, Accursed, and Boards of Canada. But obviously none of them were free to use, hence I had to try something else. So I tried listening to a bunch of royalty-free horror music, but they all suck. I even looked on Reddit to find songs that people think are creepy, but ultimately, nothing worked until I remembered something. I remember hearing this very creepy song in another Scott Derrickson project. Now I can't tell you the title of that film because they'll come after me for even daring to say the name of the movie, but let's just say backwards, the title is 58 SHV. So the song I went with was a cover of Hamburger Lady by Throbbing Gristle, with some added church bells to make it sound more Christmas themed. And I think it worked out pretty darn well if I do say so myself. And then for the beginning of the tape, I used some generic royalty-free Christmas music and slowed it down. But the music for the tape wasn't all I had to worry about. And even though the rest of the soundtrack is all royalty-free, it doesn't mean I didn't put the same amount of effort into it. So starting with the opening, I wanted a song that was calm and felt like you were exploring the unknown. Then for the basement scene, I was gonna go with some generic, creepy music, but as I was searching, I found a pretty unique song that's made up of fly sounds. Then for the scene where I set everything up, I wanted somewhat of a fast-paced kind of song, but I didn't want it to feel like an action movie, but still creepy at the same time. Fast forwarding to the end of the movie, the reason why I went with the sound of a music box was because of that creepy blooper I mentioned earlier, where a music box started playing out of nowhere. Last but not least, it wouldn't be a Sinister film if Gyroscope didn't play during the credits. Now obviously it's not the real version, but the cover I found is still awesome. So yeah, now we're finally at the end, and if you managed to stick around this long, you know every single detail about how I made this film. And who knows, maybe I'll make this sort of video for cassette one day. But until then, I hope you enjoyed.
And that's Snow Day 24, and I don't know if you could tell, but I kind of put a lot of effort into it. I'm quite proud of it. I think it's my best work by far. And I don't know what my next film might be, but I hope to improve. Because I have a huge passion to make films, and yeah, I hope I get even better. So yeah, that's about it. Oh, feeling a little woozy here. Yeah, that's about it. About it.